Okay. Hello, hello, hello. Hopefully I am working out live here. And we'll be talking about We Sold Our Souls, the October book for the Paul Reed's Book Club. Let me just check on this and tweet it out to let people know that it is going on here. And then can set this up. No, okay, I want to reverb here. Let me get on my Twitter. Give me 1 sec. With We Sold Our Souls. Okay. Okay. So now I am live. So let's talk about this book. All right. Am I gonna? Oh boy, I'm getting some real bad reverb light here. Hold on. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So We Sold Our Souls. This is a story by Grady Hendrix. I believe this is actually Grady Hendrix's best work so far. This is basically about a heavy metal band that breaks up, and we follow the aftermath of one of the main characters here, which is Kris Pulaski, at the start of this book. And we find out actually that one of the characters from this band is super successful, but not a very good person. And again, this is a really very well done book. Again, like I've said before, this I believe is Grady Hendrix's best book. And you can see that it has this nice little backwards writing here, and the wonderful black edges here that are spray painted. And again, just a beautiful looking book and a very well written book. But let me just get into the actual story here that's going on, and we can just take it from there. So let me see where I was to get to this. Again, you could always look at the Paul Reed's Book Club on Goodreads, and I update chapter by chapter what I've been reading. I haven't been doing it with the current book that I'm currently reading, which is the nonfiction book, because that is kind of more of a generalized book where I don't think I'm going to actually do that. I'm still debating whether I'm going to actually do chapter summaries on that. But right now, again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about We Sold Our Souls. So, hello, 10-minute book reviews. Good evening to you too. I just started talking about We Sold Our Souls. I'm going to get into this book right away. The first intro origin that we do is True as Steel. That's actually the first intro chapter. And in this, we're introduced to Kris Pulaski. She's a girl who took guitar lessons from a music teacher called Mr. McNutt. And after playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for like 6 weeks, she decided to pocket the money that she was given for her guitar lessons, make up a story about her guitar teacher trying to watch her pee to avoid any future lessons. She buys her own scratched up Fender and busted up amp, hides in the basement, and practices Iron Man chords for Black Sabbath song. And because that's the music she really wanted to play. And she works really hard at trying to match the chords She tries to let the whole world wash away. She talks about all the problems in the world, her classes, her brothers fighting, all the other things that are just secondary in her life. She tries to just push away and just focus on getting her fingers to make the chords to match the album. And she works and works through her hands starting to be painful, and constant practice, thinking she's never going to be able to get to it until she finally hits the chord. At least once she finally hits the chords. She could play the chords. And after this intro, we move ahead of, what's it, 6 years? Actually, we move ahead 34 years after this. So that's actually the intro chapter, just to give us an idea of who Kris Pulaski is. And it's a very well done video. It's a very well done chapter. Really good intro chapter. And again, like I said, it jumps right ahead to Welcome to Hell. And Welcome to Hell, if I can pull up my little notes on that. Welcome to Hell picks up with Kris working at a Best Western at the graveyard shift. And as he gets to the hotel, Josh Morrell, who's naked with a pillowcase over his head, with the eye slits cut out of the pillowcase, and Kris is at the reception desk. He's urinating in front of the desk, and of course she's calling the cops. We find out that her brother, Little Charles is the name of her brother, is a cop, and he comes to answer the call. So during this chapter, we also find out that Kris has been up to for all these years after she learned to play that chord in the basement. We find out she never really made it with this band, that they were just on the edge of success, and living a heavy metal lifestyle, dealing with all the different small little clubs that they had to go to, and all the kind of rowdy type of lifestyle that they had to deal with. She has tinnitus from the loud music. She has bad knees. Her right shoulders ache, and she's completely in debt. And if that's not enough, she only got this current job at the Best Western because her brother put in a good word for her. And she's been living at her mother's house. And we also find out that her brother is actually selling her mother's house. And she has 6 weeks to get out. Her mother's passed away. So the brother is just trying to move on. And of course, now that means she has no more money because she's in debt, and she's not going to have any more place to live. So that's how we actually end the first chapter of Welcome to Hell. So it kind of puts it in a nice perspective as far as where she is located in that video. I keep saying video. Where she's located so far in this storyline. Pretty much, completely nobody who now is on hard times. So we go to the next chapter, which is Powerslave. Excuse me. Hold on a second. Oh boy. Hold on. Oh jeez. Okay. Oh. Okay. So we go on to Powerslave. And in this chapter, we open up with an article about Gerner's sporting house burning down. This is one of the places that Kris's band, Dirtwork, that was the name of the band, played. We go to Kris driving her dad's old broken down 1999 Grand Marquis. We find out that her dad died of cancer. And then she jams on her brakes because she sees a billboard, Coffin, back from the grave. So Coffin is the band that Terry, one of her bandmates, actually started, and calls himself the Blind King in this group Coffin. We find out, of course, that Coffin became a huge success. That she actually, and the whole band disbanded. that she was prescribed a bunch of antidepressants to deal with the anger and hurt of the breakup of the band. Of course, we find out that her mother died before this, about 5 months before this time. And the stress of losing her house and the fact that the Blind King now is coming back again into her life. She did the only thing she knew she could do was escape, something she never thought she would do again. She went back downstairs to the basement to play the guitar. So this insinuates that she hasn't played the guitar in a very long time, and that oh, hello, Robin. No problem being late. That's fine. I'm just glad somebody's here to watch these videos. It's kind of cool why I do them live. So, like I said, she pretty much, her life is kind of just falling apart here. And the only thing she has now is trying to anyway get back is her music, trying to play guitar again. So we go to the next chapter, which is Rain in Blood. Now, all of these chapters, I believe, are song lyrics from heavy metal bands. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. But that's pretty much, I believe, where all of these titles come from, all of these chapter titles. In this chapter, we find out about the band Dirtwork, how it was formed. So it starts with Terry Hunt, which is the Blind King. He met Kris, and he looked in on her practicing her Iron Man, as we saw from that first intro chapter. And they formed a friendship from this. He also played an instrument, and together they grew close growing up. And they formed a band. Terry got the idea from the band name, actually, of Dirtwork from his uncle who worked in a graveyard. But, of course, we found out that something happened. Terry took her music, ended the contract they had. And we find out that she vaguely is in hot water with her bandmates. We don't know what happened, but we know that they hate her even more than they hate Terry. She talks about the downward spiral that she went to after the split with Terry and the band, and decided that not only now that she has to confront Terry about what he did, but also gets what's due to her. And to do that, she says she has to get the band back together as well. So this actually forms the basis for the next couple of chapters, where she actually has to find the band members out. Oh, don't, as Jay reads, late by 11 minutes. Don't worry. Again, you didn't miss much. I only covered the first couple of chapters of this story. In general, it's about this woman who had a band that she was in, and then the band broke up, and she's had hard times, and now she's actually going to try to get back to the band members and meet the guy who went on to fame and fortune, while her and the other bandmates got disbanded. And all we know now is that all the other band members hate Kris, this character I'm talking about, and we don't know why yet. So, next chapter is Under the Blade. And in this chapter, we're introduced to a completely different character. We're introduced to Melanie. So Melanie is a waitress with a dead-end job in West Virginia. She's a huge fan of Coffin. She's seen the billboard about his farewell tour, and he has dreams of seeing him. She reflects on her debt and degree that she's never been able to get a job, and the hopelessness of her situation as well. She decides she has to find a way to get out to Vegas to see this last show. So she's going to come up with a plan and goes home to her boyfriend to let him know that their lives are about to change. So Melanie comes back into the story a lot. But the next chapter, Appetite for Destruction, we go back to Kris's story again. So in Kris's story, we meet the fellow band member, Scotty Rocket. So we find out that it was 6 years since Scotty and Kris saw each other. And that Scotty's married with 2 kids. When his wife answers the door, there's a little weirdness there. She shows concern for Scotty and a little apathy towards Kris. Again, we still don't know exactly what Kris did yet, but we know it was something that all of the band members really don't appreciate. What she does is she kind of points Kris to the basement, and she kind of hopes that maybe Kris can get through to Scotty or see if he's as bad as his wife believes he is, because there's definitely something wrong with Scotty. And she says maybe seeing Kris could help him. So she goes down to the basement, and when Scotty sees her, he seems to be a paranoid mess of a person. He basically, starts talking about this album that they did, Troglodyte, which was an album that never got released. We find out that he's saying that he feels like something's missing, that Terry took something from him. And we find out more again about that Troglodyte album that has this whole mythology around it, about Black Iron Mountain and the 100-handed eye, with millions of others turning this wheel, that these 100-handed eyes watch this wheel being turned by all of these slaves, basically. And he's afraid that the blind king, that Terry wants to actually bring this mythology into the real world, this Black Mountain. And when she's trying to convince him, she said, "Look, let's just go get something to eat. Let's get out of here, get out of the basement." Because we find out that he's been basically holding himself up in the basement, scared for his life. But then he pulls out his phone, which is wrapped in tinfoil. And after he pulls out his phone, he seems to get a message in it. And he pulls out a gun. And he points it at Terry and says, "Sorry, I'm going to have to kill you now." And that's the end of the chapter. So obviously, ending on a nice little cliffhanger there to make you want to read. A lot of these chapters actually ended on some serious cliffhangers that really made you want to kind of read right through this book. So we go to the next chapter after that, which is called Destroyer. Now, Destroyer, Kris is frozen from this gun. And she talks about how, she always wondered if somebody would pull a gun on her, the concept, she would just be able to just take it down. And well, it just sounds like an interesting book and story. It is. It, like I said, I love this book. This is definitely a 5-star read for me. I really enjoyed this book. Just writing the descriptions in my actual book club thing was so fun to do. So this is definitely one of my favorite books I've read so far. Okay, so yeah, he has this gun. Kris is frozen. He talks about the song from Troglodyte again. He tries to get something out of this fanny pack that he's wearing. He goes, "I wrote it down. I wrote down basically something to give to Kris." And when he turns his back to Kris, she tries to escape, obviously, out of the basement. But the padlock is on. She didn't notice that he actually put a padlock on the basement door when she was downstairs with him. He continues to talk about how Troglodyte was the bullet they created to stop him. And that is why he buried this album, and why he buried it deep, and that only the 5 band members know about this album, and that's why he wants to kill the others. And when he sees she tries to escape, he grabs her, he brings her back down, he starts spouting lyrics from the album, and she goes along with it, trying to spout lyrics with him, totally petrified about what he's going to do, and he shouts at her to watch out for the UPS trucks. And then he says that Terry said someone has to die, but he didn't say who. So he takes the gun, he puts it to his own head, and fires. So at that time, Kris grabs the envelope that he had coming out of his fanny pack. She gets the keys off of his dead body, unlocks the door, and tells Angela, his wife, to call the police. So just then, the doorbell rings, and one of the children call out that it's UPS. Then Kris hears gunshots. She runs to the pantry, hides in the pantry. She hears these UPS men talking. She hears these UPN men going down the basement, taking Scotty's notes. She hears them walking around the house. There's a couple of little scenes where she's worried: is the UPS men going to find all the different people in the house? And she hears shot after shot at the one child upstairs. She wonders if that person is going to be safe, but no. She hears upstairs. She hears a shot up there, and she's just petrified about it. And they killed the wife. They killed the two kids, and then they leave the house because they don't know that Kris is there. And after they leave the house, the last thing you realize is her realizing that Scotty was right about his paranoia. And he was right that someone was obviously trying to kill him. And they killed all of his family to keep the secret safe. So, yeah, it's a pretty dark book, actually. Like I said, for Grady Hendrix, this is actually a pretty dark book. I mean, it does have some humor in it, but nowhere near as much as he normally has. So we get past this story. It's very a paranoid kind of conspiracy theory type of book. It definitely deals with that culture. So the next chapter is Awaken the Guardian. And this chapter we return back to Melanie, who goes home to her boyfriend Greg and tells him her new plan. She wants to see Coffin in Las Vegas. So they move out to California to get out of this town. Greg's playing video games and he's talking about boomers and how bad they are and the protests. And he finally agrees to move out. She then notices a tattoo on his neck with FML on it. And this starts a whole big argument. She's like, how are you going to get a job if you have this F my life tattoo on your back, on your neck? No one's going to hire you for that. Why did you do that? And we find out after this argument that Melanie has actually been texting somebody, a guy named Hunter. And it's kind of been on Tinder. She's been, sexting him kind of. It hasn't actually been like an affair, but it's kind of been something where she's just kind of been flirting with the guy. And he has tickets for Coffin that he has. And she talked to him about getting those tickets because she definitely wants to see the Coffin concert. And she says that, she wants her and Greg to start over again. So she still says that she still is with Greg and that she's going to work with Greg and they're still going to go to the concert together. So that's the end of that chapter. Then the next chapter is called Holy Diver. And we find out that on the radio, they talk about Scotty killing his family and then himself. So they've already spun the story to be that he killed himself and his family. He was basically this crazy person. But they do mention that there's an unidentified witness. So they know that Kris was there. So she knows they're looking for her. She goes to meet Tuck. This is the next band member. She goes to meet Tuck and very reluctant. Tuck is very reluctant to talk to her at first. He's married to Lily, who Kris remembers throwing cold coffee in her face as she tried to visit Tuck in the hospital. So now we know that this band member was in the hospital. So obviously there was something that happened. Was it an accident? We're not really sure exactly what happened yet, but we know whatever she did caused this band member to go into the hospital. And she tells him that Scotty has a letter for her. And Tuck finally reads this letter. And in the letter, Scotty talks about this darkness inside him and also about contract night, which he can't remember the night the band signed this contract. Now, this contract is about when Terry basically took over all the rights to all of the songs from Dirtwork, and pretty much all of the band members quickly got fired after this contract negotiation signing. But they talk again about troglodyte being the key. And Tuck, reluctantly agrees to take Kris to see Bill, which is another band member. And there's a tense scene between Lily and Kris while a coffin song is playing. And this was actually the same song that preceded Scotty's suicide, was playing during Scotty's suicide. And she kind of freaks out. Like, is there some kind of conspiracy between these two? Are they going to kind of, turn on her? But he agrees to take her to Bill after supper, and she waits in the car until he has his dinner. And after dinner, he gets in the car to take Kris to see Bill. So, yeah, cold coffee. Cold coffee isn't as bad as hot coffee. No. Uh, hi, Satina. Nice to see you there as well. Thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. Okay, so the next chapter is From Enslavement to Obliteration. Oh, wait a minute. I have a bit of a cold. Excuse me. Okay. In this chapter, we go to the Kentucky Hills to Witch House. It's called, to meet Bill. We find out the Witch House was this place the band went to recharge. Basically, kind of a pit stop in the Midwest where they used to go during their touring. And they recorded Troglodyte there, actually, in Witch House. And this house also was the famous spot where they signed this contract. So what happened was the band got a deal touring with Slayer. And Terry trashed the room, bad-mouthed the band, and got the whole band kicked off the tour. So the other band members were furious, obviously, and they planned to go to Witch House, where they were going to kick Terry out of the band. And Rob, the manager, though, had a different plan. He wanted to rebrand the band Coffin and change them from a heavy metal band to a new metal band. Terry would own everything. The band members would just be salaried employees who can be fired at will. And, of course, they would bury the album Troglodyte. So obviously everyone took this idea really, really badly. Kris was fuming because she wrote most of Troglodyte. And at this point, you actually find out there was an extra song for Troglodyte that wasn't on the album, which does come into play later on. As soon as I read that, I was like, okay, this is about to be mentioned later on. So Kris grabs alcohol, runs out of the witch house, completely fuming. And later on, she comes back, and that's when things start getting a little foggy in her memory. She remembers all the contracts, but hers were signed. And she remembers having to get the band out of the basement and driving away, and then there was an accident. But the last thing she remembers were lights of a UPS van. Was it more sad or scary to you? I don't know about scary. It was a very action packed. It felt like one of these kind of conspiracy theory thrillers type. Kind of like the old, I would say old Race with the Devil or something like. It was definitely in that kind of vein of, okay, it was this mystery that was this dark, kind of, this dark kind of conspiracy type of mystery story with obviously a lot of horror elements. It definitely had, again, like I said, a lot of that conspiracy element to it. From Enslavement, that was the last chapter. Next one was Countdown to Extinction. Is the next chapter. In this chapter, Kris and Scotty are driving to meet Bill at the witch house. And Kris talks more about that contract night. She talks about how the timeline doesn't match up. There are parts missing, and how Scotty said they shouldn't trust their own memories. We get more details on the accident and what happened, and we finally get to the witch house. We see Bill waiting for them in a wheelchair. So obviously we know now that besides Scotty being in the hospital, this accident that they blame on Kris actually put Bill in a wheelchair as well. So next chapter is called High and Dry. And now we find out what happened to Witch House is that Bill kind of turned Witch House into this kind of new agey rehab center thing for me. That he mentioned that there's a well on the property, and it's this really pure water well that's supposed to have like healing properties. And Kris actually remembers the well. She remembers staring into the well and listening to water rushing as she came up with the mythology of troglodyte. We also find out that the basement that was there is covered with concrete. That he supposedly, filled up the basement with concrete. So Bill, Tuck, and Kris all go into this sweat box outside of Witch House and talk about this contract night. Bill stresses that yes, the timelines don't make sense either, that there are hours missing. And we find a little bit more about the accident. The lawyers for Terry offers her a deal, and she rips up the contract. But when she finds out that Bill is going to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, and she's about to get sued by all of the members of the band because they blame her for the accident, she calls back the manager. She agrees to the contract, where she gets $500,000, and all the money that she gets, then she wanted giving all of it to them, all of it to the other bandmates. And of course, she's in debt because she actually doesn't pay the taxes on the money. She actually just gives all the money away to everybody else and then has no money for taxes. So now she's in debt, actually, from this contract deal. The contract prevents her performing any kind of music that sounds like her former band. It basically means she can't play any kind of music, any heavy metal music or any kind of music in general, because any kind of music that she'll play is going to sound like the music she's always played in her time. And she actually has some times where she actually tried to play the music, and then she got like slapped with injunctions to cease and desist because she couldn't play the music. So basically, not only did this contract steal from her, but it basically prevented her from ever being a successful musician ever again, because she can't play the music that she loves and knows about. While she's in the sweatbox, she notices a butterfly logo on the towel, and she remembers this logo on Scotty's leg, and then she starts to feel disoriented. She plops back down on the bench, unable to stand, and she realizes she was drugged. She starts to say something, but then Tuck says she has to let go of the past, and then she just blacks out. So that's the end of that chapter. Next chapter is called Theater of Pain. So in this chapter, Kris wakes up in a white room. She's strapped to a bed and she's covered in a rubber sheet, basically preventing her from moving. She has a catheter inside her, and Bill is talking about how Scotty went through Bill's rehab center. So we find out that this rehab center that Bill actually had Scotty in this rehab center. That's actually how we linked the butterfly tattoo. That butterfly is the symbol of the rehab center. And we find out that Terry was in contact with Bill already, and he was paying for Kris's conversion. Bill talks more about troglodyte and how Kris tapped into something real, and that the vision of troglodyte is something amazing. Tuck decides that Bill is going to help Kris get her life back in order through this whole new age rehab type of thing. Kris tries to plead with Bill, to please let her go, but no avail. She remembers the note that Scotty says and how metal never surrenders, and then she blacks out again. And that's the end of that chapter. So Next chapter is Fighting the World. So now we go back to Melanie. Melanie is really working hard at trying to save her money for this last show for Coffin, and she tries, as much as she tries, she just can't scrape enough money together. She was giving up on her dream, though. She finds out that there's an extra festival that Coffin is doing in addition to his tour. And this festival is called Hellstock 2018 with, Coffin and a whole bunch of other bands. So she's inspired again that maybe she could actually make enough money to actually go to that concert, this Hellfest concert in Vegas. She contacts Hunter. He's supportive, says, oh, yeah, he's been going to all the different Coffin shows, and they were amazing. And he can definitely get her tickets to see this Hellstock show. Even Greg seems gung-ho about this new Hellstock show. And he tells her that he's got a job at GameStop. And so hopefully the money that he gets from GameStop, they can really go to this thing. But then we find out that there were a series of tragedies that were all of the other previous Coffin shows. Some rednecks threw a beer at some Coffin kids and they shot him with a 22, leaving the driver blind with a plate in his skull. At the Rose Bowl, a woman was attacked and rescued by Coffin kids, who then beat the attacker almost to death, and now he wasn't in coma. The woman they actually rescued, they grabbed scissors and sliced her tongue right down the middle. One of the Coffin kids that were arrested hung himself. Others were awaiting trial. We find out that Greg was lying to Melanie then, that he wasn't working at the GameStop to actually get money for the concert. He was working at the GameStop to get a discount so he could buy the new Xbox console. And he got a credit card from GameStop, and now he's actually in more debt because he used his money plus the credit to buy this Xbox console. So now she doesn't have enough money for both of them to go. And she barely has enough money to go for herself. So she decides to screw Greg, and she's like, you know what? I'm still going. Goodbye, Greg. And she leaves him and just heads by herself to Vegas, contacts Hunter and says she's coming alone, and left for Las Vegas. So let's see. Next chapter was Destroy, Erase, Improve. So now we're back to Kris and this therapy conversion process. We see Bill's wife, Miranda. I believe it's his wife or associate. She tries to convince Kris that there's no conspiracy. She's to blame for her current state and not Terry. And they keep drugging Kris throughout this process. But Kris has a secret weapon. She keeps remembering Troglodyte. And she slowly keeps repeating all of the tracks from the album, starting with the intro that Bill created, where he took sounds around Witch House and created this creepy compilation of sounds. And we'll walk through the lyrics and motivations of each song interspersed with the chapter. And then trying to break Kris. They keep trying to break her, but she doesn't speak. She doesn't break. She keeps thinking about the power of the album and the lyrics and how it's going to save her. And at the end of the chapter, she's about to recount the last song of the Troglodyte album, Down Where the Worms Squirm. We find out it was about rain. And at this time, we hear a news article that there's a flash flood warning. Next chapter is called Let's Rumble. Kris realizes that the lights went out, and suddenly she sees people with flashlights as the storm hits the retreat. So she starts to sneak out, walks through the facility, avoiding the people around as she heads toward Miranda's office. During this time, she grabs her guitar and sneaks into one of the rehab patient's rooms. She finally realizes what was missing on that night of the contract signing and the true story of what happened. So what happened was she remembers coming back to Witch House after running off and heading to the basement. There she saw these creatures that were on top of all of the other bandmates, and they were feeding on them. There was this black goo kind of coming out of their mouth. It was a very descriptive writing as far as these very thin, skeletal, very thin flesh skeletal type creatures that were just sucking this blackness out of these people, and they attacked her. A fight ensues, and then she grabs everyone out of their stupor, and she heads to the van to escape. And she realized that the accident wasn't a UPS truck that she remembered, but one of the creatures was attacking her and breaking through the window, causing the accident. And then they basically had a chance to finish their feeding on all the other bandmates while they were laying in the street after the accident. So we go back to the present, where she sees Gary, who's one of the patients, also being fed on one of these same creatures that she remembers from the basement. And she takes a guitar and slams the creature with it, hitting it over and over and over again until it stops moving. And she keeps trying to get back to Witch House, where she runs into Miranda again. And this time she uses the guitar on her as a weapon to destroy her and heads to Witch House. She knows that Bill stated that they filled the basement with concrete, but she believes he lied. And she hammers the wall where the door to the basement used to be, hammers it and starts breaking out the plaster, where she sees the blue door to the basement. She's able to open the door and find out that, yes, the basement is still there. It was not concreted up. And she goes down into the basement at the end of this chapter. Next chapter is Sleep's Holy Mountain. And in this chapter, Kris runs deep into the well, into the basement, and climbs down into it. The others from the retreat seal up the cap to the well, and Kris takes a long journey through tight pipes and caves covered with bat guano and beetles. And again, a really hard, long trip through these tight areas that scrape her skin, and you feel the claustrophobia while she talks about how she gets through all these different areas, hoping that she can get through this labyrinth of passages, where she can barely breathe in some of these spots. But she finally gets out. She breaks free, gets out to the highway, and crosses the highway. Next one is Stay Hungry. So we find out after she actually broke out of the retreat, she spends most of her time like a vagrant. She scouges for clothes and food. She finds out that it's already August at this time, and she thinks she already missed all the concerts of Terry. That Terry won. The concerts were over, but then she realizes that there's this other concert coming out, which we've talked about, and Melanie found out about, called Hellstock. That's coming out in September, so it's not over. Terry didn't get the best of her, but again, she still feels defeated because she's Bill and Tuck, against her, and obviously Scotty is past now. There's one other person she can contact, and that's somebody in St. Louis. So she heads down. Was it St. Louis the person? Well, actually, she heads down to St. Louis, and she gets $80 for playing guitar from this derelict that she meets in St. Louis. And she uses that $80 to head to Kansas, actually, to this one last person in the band, who probably hates Terry more than she did. Next chapter is Don't Break the Oath. So she goes to see this band member who's the former drummer. He got kicked out and replaced by Bill, though. But he knows what's going on. He seems to know everything that's going on. And he informs her that Terry sold their souls for fame and fortune. And he says that all of the band members' souls were sold in this contract negotiation, and that together they both leave for the concert. And just like Scotty, this other band member seems a little wackadoodle. He's called Jefferson. Jefferson Davis actually is his name. And he says they're going to have to kill Terry. And Kris says, no, no killing. I just want to trust my music to guide me to what to do. And that's the end of that chapter. So the next chapter is called With Odin on Our Side. Jefferson and Kris are driving, and they hear Rob, Terry's manager, on the radio show, talking about how they have spruced up extra security for Hellstock because there's a plan to kill Terry from a deranged former band member from Dirtwork, Kris Pulaski. So they blame her now for Scotty's death, and she's a wanted fugitive. So basically, the 100 eyes, like the song said, are on the lookout for her. And that's how we end that chapter. Next chapter is Twilight of the Gods. Here we find out that the roads to Vegas are completely blocked. Jefferson and Kris kind of argue about what they're supposed to do. They're both wanted by the police now. They keep stealing different cars to try to stay off track. JD's paranoia becomes even worse. And after attempt to try to get into Vegas, Kris just had enough of his confusion and delusions and says, I can't. So she says, pull the car over. And she's going to a rest stop kind of bathroom and says, I'm leaving. I'm going to do this on my own. I can't put you involved in this. I have to do this on my own. And she just and he just drives away. Next chapter is Master of Puppets. So after JD leaves, she tries to bump a cigarette off of someone. And then she starts seeing people pull out all their phones and start filming her, surrounding her, in fact, calling her slut and all these horrible names. And she realized that the 100-handed eye found her. They all start to crouch around her. Like I said, start jabbing at her and, definitely threatening for her life. And JD comes back at this point. Quickly is able to get into his car to get away, but they swarm the car and they grab and tear at both Kris and JD to the point where they actually grab JD's cheek and literally rip his cheek apart, literally rip the skin off of his face as they attack him in the car and her in the car because she says to drive through these people and he's scared he's going to actually run these people over. He doesn't want to run them over. So they just break through the glass and claw and scrape at both JD and Kris. So she slams on the accelerator, and tries to get away. So as she gets away, JD's dead. They pretty much have literally pretty much ripped his skin off, kind of broke his neck, or they tried to pull him out of the car. And Kris did get away. She was able to get away, by holding the wheel and stepping on the accelerator from this mob of people. So she does a little bit of mourning for JD. She ditches the car and she goes to a gas station to try to change her looks. So she cuts her hair and changes her appearance. She had no clue what she's going to do next now. But then fate smiles on her again because a woman comes along and helps give her a ride because Kris tells her a story about an abusive relationship that she's trying to get out of because she actually has blood on her clothes. They wonder, what actually happened. And, and obviously she's all bruised up. And the person who's helping her give her a ride is Melanie, the person who we've just talked about in the other previous chapters. So Melanie and Kris wind up coming together now on this trip to see Coffin in that last trip, that last Hellfest in Vegas, I believe it is. So next chapter is Little Sparrow. And in this chapter, we find out that Kris and Melody get into an argument about Coffin. And, because, obviously Melody's favorite band now is Coffin. So she's talking about it, and Kris freaks out. She talks about Coffin, and then Melody gets all upset. And, and Kris apologizes. And they try to find something that they can agree on, what kind of music they can both like and talk about. And they actually wind up bonding over Dolly Parton music. Melanie realizes that Kris didn't have an ex-husband that abused her, but she still wants to continue to drive her, and she agrees to accept Melanie's help at the end of this chapter. So at the end of the chapter, they actually arrive in Vegas. Next chapter is called Toxicity. Here, Kris and Melanie meet Hunter and his crew. They talk for a while, and Hunter says for Melanie to drop off her car and she can drive with them to the festival. Melanie convinces Kris to come along with them because, Hunter still has an extra ticket because she has Greg's ticket. And Kris goes back to the room. But after Kris leaves the group, Hunter informs Melanie that she's been driving with Kris, the person who wants to kill Terry. And Melanie's conflicted because she doesn't know, should she call the police or Terry's hotline? And when Kris gets out of the shower, she hears a knock on the door saying it's UPS. Next chapter is Into the Night Slide Eclipse. So here the UPS men, obviously the bad guys in the story here, subdue Kris and start pouring these drugs down her throat. They're planning to have her OD and then hang herself in the bathroom. Melanie's at the concert with Hunter and the guys. She wonders if calling the hotline was the right thing to do. She hates that she ratted out Kris, but at the event, Terry invites Melanie and the guys backstage to talk to her and thanks her for making this call. But she notices there's this weird kind of communication between the guys and Terry. There's some kind of secret thing going on, and she's not really sure what it is. And Kris is fighting for her life, tries to tell the UPS men that she wants to speak to Terry over and over again. The drugs that they poured down her throat start to take effect. That they forced down her throat, actually, start to take effect. And at this time, she tells him she wrote a second Troglodyte album. And she needs it to play it for Terry because the concert won't go as planned. She needs to play it for him. This is her last chance at some kind of ruse to stop them from killing her. And they're just about to hang her in the bathroom when the phone rings. It appears that Terry got Kris's message, and Kris's life is spared at the moment. And that's how that chapter actually ends. Next chapter is Diary of a Madman. And Kris is ushered to see Terry at this time. So he asks her to play this new album. And she obviously asks for her soul back. And he says he can't get it back. It's gone. It was eaten. It was taken. It's completely gone. And he talks about how he wants to be a legend and how the mountain took everything from him to create, and that they should work together again to create, him and her. and Rob comes in and calls her bluff. So she goes to the guitar, wishing anything could happen, but nothing comes. At the time, there's actually just Rob now and this maid that's or cleaning woman that's in this room because Terry already left. Um, and obviously the jig is up that because Rob realizes that she doesn't have any new album and there's nothing else that she can do right now. So he starts to goad her after this. This is Devil is Fine, the next chapter. He says this attempt was futile. And then he talks about a sparrow and how it tries to destroy a mountain one pebble at a time, and how no matter how long it does, it can take a pebble away from a mountain over and over and over again, and the mountain will still be there long after the sparrow dies, but it constantly keeps just trying to take this mountain down one pebble at a time. He says they're going to drug her, they're going to perform surgery on her, they're going to put her back in that Best Western that she started at. And he actually believes that it is kind of the end of the world, that the mountain's going to swallow up the whole world after this concert. Because even though they might get 500,000 souls at this concert, it's not going to satisfy him. So you basically realize that they've been taking souls at all of these coffin concerts. And that is probably why all this violence has been showing up. If you've been seeing these stories about these violent acts at these concerts, is how they've been feeding off of the fans at these coffin concerts. And this last Hellfest is going to be this huge thing. Is going to be the huge Armageddon. About like 500,000 people are going to actually be swallowed up from these soul eaters. And when she thinks about it, and she thinks about how Melanie is going to be in that audience, and that she might want to becoming one of these soulless people, she realizes that she can't give up, and she punches Rob out. She asks the maid to switch clothes with her, and the maid, who's just been listening, I guess in the background that nobody's been giving a crap about, agrees to switch clothes with her. And of course, she escapes that area. So now we get to You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. We're getting towards the end of this. You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. Melanie notices that the crowd is a rowdy crowd. Women are being hoisted up. Their clothes are being torn off. People are being crushed. But the guys and Hunter are guarding her. She finally hears the songs, but they don't feel like they used to feel. They feel shallow. Some of the people, including Hunter, start grabbing at her. And Hunter yells, "Die, bitch," and slams his head into a speaker. So obviously the music and I guess these soul eaters are there, slowly manipulating these fans to become darker images of themselves. So Kris kind of, is trying to get backstage, and she runs into Tuck, who is backstage looking like he's going to actually go on stage. That he tells Melanie, first of what are you doing here? And he said that he's here because he's going to go on stage and do China Girl, which is an old Dirtwork song, which she says pretty much the worst Dirtwork song we actually wrote. Why are you guys doing that song? And she says, please, you have to help me. You know something's wrong here. Can't you see it? Can't you see what's going on in the audience? Can't you see what's going on with everything? Can't you feel it? And and Tuck finally realizes, okay, what do you need her to do? And she says, just let me go on. Let me take your spot. Get me in behind backstage. So he gets her in backstage, and Terry is about to introduce Tuck and say, look, we're going to do this song, China Girl from my old Dirtwork album, and he goes to introduce Tuck, but instead of Tuck showing up, Kris comes out, and she comes out with a guitar. So now we get to pretty much the I would say, the final chapter of the story before the epilogue, which is called Troglodyte. Okay. So Chris, she goes on stage, she grabs the mic and says that Terry is getting Dirk Rourke back together and they're playing Troglodyte. So Terry doesn't know what to do, and all the audience goes mental when they hear about Troglodyte, because this has been kind of like the mythical urban legend that they try to find tapes for. And some people have supposedly bootlegs of it, but everybody wants to hear this mystery album, and she just starts playing it. Before Terry can even stop her, she just starts playing this song. And obviously, being the showman that he is playing the song. He hears them screaming out that they want the song, and he just starts singing the lyrics. You go to Melanie, who is bruised and swollen and battered, and a woman grabs her, hoists her up to the sound booth, rescuing her from these guys, and she watches Kris obviously on stage, and she watches her play, and Kris plays song after song, and Terry keeps going along with it, and she calls Tuck back on stage, and they play through the whole album. There's a lot of symbolism here about waves and a lot of stuff that's dealing with Black Mountain and what's going on, and how this album, I guess, is fighting back the darkness, and the crowd starts to mellow out, starts to get under control. And then the merchandise booths go on fire. There's a huge flames that go on, and the whole area completely gets destroyed. But it's a lot less damage than it could have been, because basically Terry's songs and the album saved all these people. Basically, is what you determine from this. And we pick up 3 years later after this event, and we have no idea what happened to Kris after this. There's a lot of urban legends about her. Some say she's traveling the world, randomly going to open mic nights and playing new stuff that gets shared or played online. Troglodyte's getting remixed by Miranda. Miranda's actually going to put out Troglodyte and remix it. Terry is trying to get his creative juices flowing, and he cannot do it, no matter how much he tries. Every single thing that he thinks is a new song is actually an old song that he winds up ripping off that he doesn't realize. Just completely frustrated that all of his creativity is completely gone. I mean, that was pretty much, I guess, the deal he made with the Mountain, is that he basically has no creativity left at all. JD's mom, sometimes he hears drums playing in the basement, and she thinks that's somehow JD telling her that he's okay wherever he is. So there's this kind of, I guess, ghostly mystery. JD playing drums for his mother in his basement. Melanie, at the end of this, is actually trying to learn how to play guitar, because she heard Kris at Hellstock, and she really wants to match those lyrics, and this last chapter is a perfect bookend to the first chapter, where Kris is trying to learn this one set of chords, and Melanie is doing the same thing, practicing and practicing and practicing until she can finally hit those chords. And then she finally hits the chord, and it talks about, the last line is, she feels like a sparrow after taking down that chord, a sparrow taking down the mountain, a pebble at a time. And that's how We Sold Our Souls ends. And for anybody who's still watching this video, I know this was kind of a long video, and I appreciate all the people who actually came on in the beginning. I know I've lost a couple of people, so I guess I'm kind of a dull talker. But for those who listen to this whole story, I could tell you that again, I love this story. I think if you are a fan of a heavy metal story, you will really like it. There are some things I haven't mentioned. That a lot of this story actually takes place in the Allentown, Lehigh Valley area, which I am pretty familiar with. So, oh, okay, Robin, you're still here. I know a lot of people are just listening to me talk, so I appreciate you still being here. Um, a lot of this story took place in Allentown area, which I actually work in near that area, so I kind of somewhat familiar with it. So that was kind of nice to see talked about in this book. Um, and again, just like the whole heavy metal references, the references to new metal and versus heavy metal, and just again, like I said, I honestly feel like this is Grady Hendrix's best work. I feel like Kris, if you are familiar with Grady Hendrix's work, Kris reminds me a little bit of the female character in Horror Store. I think that he did as far as like a pretty uh, no nonsense kind of smart ass kind of character, female character that he writes. Actually, when I think about Grady Hendrix and all the books that he's written, all of his women characters are actually very well written. You know, we have now my best friend's exorcism. We sold our souls. We have Horror Store. All three of these had very good female main characters in them. So that is actually really interesting from a male horror author to have all of his books have very strong female characters in them. And I don't think there's much else I can say about this book. Currently, I am reading Satanic Panic, which is the nonfiction book that will come out next month. I really enjoyed. I'm enjoying that book so far. Again, that's a nonfiction book about 80s paranoia, which does include heavy metal as well. So I am definitely interested in reading through that book. And to all those who actually have stuck through this long video, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye.